Welcome, everybody.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here on this beautiful evening. It is my great pleasure to introduce Carl Mehrbach this evening. He is an extremely thoughtful artist and powerful, and I'm really looking forward to hearing more about his journey to this moment, and maybe even a little bit beyond. All right, not yet. Carl holds a Bachelor of Science from the University of Notre Dame, a Master of Oceanography from the Oregon State University. He studied at the Art Students League in New York City. He also has a Master of Fine Arts from Boston University. He studied with many great artists, including Bruce Dorfman, Seymour Lichtman, and Philip Guston. And Carl, you are one of those greats now as well. So without any further ado, please give a warm welcome to Carl Mehrbach.
Yeah, Mila was saying she hopes, do you hear me? Is this working? Okay. Anyway, she said that she was hoping maybe I'd go a step after this and tell you where I'm going next. But to be honest, I've been very fond of Joseph Campbell, the person who studied myths in our world. And one of the things he said is that if you're along a path and you know what the next step is, it's not your path. And I really don't know what the next step is. In fact, if I just start with that, if you look at my paintings, every single one is different. And that's been my journey through my whole life. I've never known what's going to happen next. So when I step up to a canvas, you know, Picasso once said one of the most frightening things in the world is a blank canvas. And it is, and I can't say it's frightening, but you know, you have to take the first step, and then the journey begins. And I think that's the way I see of everything, is a journey. And so I thought I'd start with where I came from before I started painting. And so I just have a few reminders to myself here. I was born in New Jersey, but very early on we moved to the West Coast. And the reason that's important is because I got very involved with the light on the West Coast. It was very much different than New Jersey. And that keeps coming up in my painting. And in fact, when I first went to New York City to study art, I used to draw and paint with a group of painters on Green Street in Soho. And people would come up to me and always say, "Where do you come from? You have so much light in your painting." And I said, "Well, I'm from Los Angeles." And they said, "Oh, that makes sense." So it stuck with me all my life. So that's why I wanted to mention that. The second thing I wanted to mention is that I had no, I didn't wake up being a painter. I began my first sort of road of achievement in my life that really kind of fed my ego and made me feel like, you know, there's a place to be here on earth for me, through running. Because I got to high school and they put me on a track and I beat everybody. Like I just walked. So I became one of the best runners in California at the time. I went to Notre Dame on a full athletic scholarship for running. And so that was my first great success in life. Unfortunately, at Notre Dame, I got severely injured. For the doctor here, I got osteochondritis dissecans in my knee. And they warned me that if I continued to put in the miles, I was putting in 15 to 20 miles a day at the time, which was pretty crazy. They don't do that anymore. They're smarter now. That I would probably have arthritis and I'd be impaired the rest of my life. So I decided to do something else. And I was starting to achieve in chemistry because for some reason, because of the chemistry high school teacher, I went into chemistry. And I became, it just sort of came to me. Just like running came to me, it came to me. So I kept being surprised by why am I so able? And I was really surprised. And I ended up getting a Phi Beta, I graduated Phi Beta Kappa, magna cum laude in chemistry, decided to go on to graduate school in science. I was excelling, so I went, but I had this romantic fiber in me, and I said, I don't want to be a chemist in a lab the rest of my life. I want to be on the seas and the ocean because I grew up right next to the ocean in Los Angeles. So tell me if this gets boring, by the way, because I haven't got to the painting yet. But anyway, so I went to oceanography school at Oregon State University. Again, I began to excel like crazy. I mean, it sounds like bragging, but it just happened. I started publishing papers. I was in a group that had the very first model on global warming. We predicted by 2040 the temperature of the Earth would be so hot that everybody would be dead. It was a very bad model, but we forgot a whole bunch of stuff. Okay, well, we were the first ones. Okay, anyway, one of my papers is still used today by oceanographers throughout the world that has to do with the carbon dioxide in seawater. And if you look it up on the web, Mehrbach and carbon dioxide, you'll see it's still thought of as the most important paper in that field. Even though I was, my whole career only lasted 2 years in oceanography. So anyway, I started to paint at Oregon State. And just on my own, I'm going to show you that in a second. And I went into my advisor and I said, I can't do this anymore. I don't like, because I thought I was going to be on the high seas, like I said. They only put me out there for 10 days to collect samples, and then they put me back in the lab to figure all this stuff out. So the seawater is in the labs. It wasn't out in the ocean. And I just couldn't see myself at a desk the rest of my life thinking about the problems of the world like that, at least in the, even though it's a very important topic, it wasn't for me. I was a very physically active person, and I liked standing and moving. And so I started to do art, and I told my advisor I'm leaving. He offered me a PhD in 1 year, so I was going to be a 3-year PhD. I just told him, no, I can't do it. And he actually, it was kind of interesting seeing, because he said to me, I came in and told him I was leaving. He said, I'll offer you a PhD in 1 year. And I said, I want to go home and think about that, because it was a pretty good offer, a 3-year PhD total. And he said, you got to say right now, yes or no. And I just said, no. So that was the end of that. So the next, I finished up, got my master's there, as Mila said, and then just drove to New York City and got in there. And luckily, I had some relatives in New York City. They took me in for a little while. I then went to the Y. I lived in New York City in a YMHA. Went to the Art Students League, and then I'll mention the teaching about art, physics, and problem solving as we go along, because that brings us up to the first painting. So let's go to the next slide. So anyway, this is 1970. This is the very first painting I ever did. It is a copy of an Alfred Sisley landscape. Alfred Sisley, you probably know Monet and Manet and all the rest of the Impressionists. You may not know Alfred Sisley. He was the only English impressionist at the time. So he painted alongside many of them. But in fact, there are paintings that are very similar, like Monet and Alfred Sisley, but of course they look a little different. So anyway, so that was my first effort, and you can see where I was drawn into something that was very popular at the time. So let's go to the next slide. You have to hit twice to get it. So this is my first painting by myself without, well, I did copy a photograph, but the reason I'm showing it to you is because, as you can see, I was at Notre Dame. This is 1971, is because it's a Vermont landscape, which I had no idea I was ever going to get here, okay? But there it is. So, but one of the things that was important to me in this painting that I remember, it's kind of, you can't see it here, but these trees have little highlights of the bark. And I remember as I made the trees with the bark and the way they rotated around and the light hit them and they became a rounded object, it just made me very happy, okay? So it hit something in my soul, which you'll see come back later. Let's go to the next slide. Now I went to Corvallis, Oregon. I started looking at a lot of artists. These are the artists that really struck me right away. For some reason, I started to collect. I remember the Time Life series of art books, which I still have. So there's they used to put one out every couple months or something, and I would, as a subscription, so there's like 40 of them. And that's how I spent my time when I wasn't being an oceanography student at Oregon. So but the reason I'm showing you these is because I'm going to show you right now after this. So this is P.A. Mondrian. This is, of course, the Cezanne, and this is Salvador Dali. And the things I want you to notice in these, I guess, is the flatness of space here, which became really important to me right away to understand that this is the 20th century dilemma that at least it began 20th century. Maybe it actually started a little earlier because of Cezanne. But the whole thing of flat space versus space with depth. And Cezanne, there's, I could talk a few hours about Cezanne, but he's the one who really started paring down and flattening space and making people realize that a painting is on a two-dimensional canvas, and we should emphasize that because that's the thing that you have to deal with as you enter a canvas. And then if you do something else to it, like create depth, you still have to be conscious that every single part of the painting is on a flat piece of paper or a canvas. And we'll talk more about that later. But Dali, of course, is well known for shadows and heightened things, but you can see the whiteness of this particular drawing and how he does keep the space animated in a flat way too. I guess you want me to move on. Okay, so that's okay. Go on, that's fine. Okay, so this is in Oregon. This is one of my first paintings all by myself. I had someone sit with me. He hated it because I was so slow. Okay, and then the other thing is he would come. I gave him the key to my house so that he could come and visit me. He was from New York, so he used to come in and make a phone call because we had a landline. We were one of the few people, for some reason, the graduate students who actually paid for the landline. So he'd come over and he would eat one of my apples, and I always got pissed at him because I'd go back. I said, "Wait, I can't paint it. There's an apple missing." He said, "Oh, I ate it." So I used to go out and Anyway, but this is very Cezanne-like. You can see the way the surface is animated in the through the windows and stuff. I was having it's very basic, but I was doing little. Cezanne's very well known for talking about the little. What did he call it? Little sensations. Okay, so if you look at Cezanne's, and you can pick apart how he sensed each portion of it and how it worked, and that whole idea that again animates the space and makes it very conscious. It's two-dimensional because you can see the two-dimensional touches as you cross even the three-dimensional. And Cezanne, by the way, is also well known for his apples. People say, no one's ever made apples as round as Cezanne. So that's why Cezanne really appealed to me, because he would set these extremely beautiful round apples on a canvas that was so animated in a two-dimensional way as well. Okay, next slide. Doesn't go?
No. Interesting.
Okay, yeah. And of course, and this is the other painting I made in Oregon. And actually, this was purchased. It was actually my first. What do they call it? The guy wanted a painting, so I asked him what size. What's that called? A commission. Okay. So anyway, he's from New York. He was leaving graduate school. He couldn't stand oceanography either. So he said, "Look, I want to go back to, I'm from the Bronx or something like that. Can you make me a painting?" And I said, "Yeah, how much do you want to pay?" He said, $30. So this is a $30 painting. So I said, "Okay, what size do you want?" And this is a pretty big painting. It's like 5 foot by 5 foot. I'd never stretched a canvas or anything before. But the reason I'm showing you this is because you can see the influences I put on one of the previous slides. Here's the Mondrian part, and there are very similar, so the flatness of space. And I was trying to deal with mostly in this case, I was looking at Dali too, and I was trying to cast the shadows and create a three-dimensional ball. So there's the beginning of my idea of having to deal with both of those things, the three dimensions and the two-dimensional simultaneously. Okay, we can go on to the next one. Okay, so then I went to New York, and the reason I'm showing you these is because if I arrived in New York with any precursors and influences, These are the batch that were really on my mind. Matisse, who I admire tremendously, the way he goes about things. You know, as I said, like the Joseph Campbell thing about taking it step by step, there's nobody like Matisse that does that. I mean, Picasso is not that way. He's very oriented in terms of, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. Matisse will discover in paintings. It's really remarkable. And that self-discovery on the road to making a painting, if anyone's taught me that more than anybody else, is Matisse. Cézanne's like that too. But Cézanne, though, here's a Cézanne here, and you can see the very rounded apples. This is a Picasso before he went to analytical cubism, like an early cubist, and you can see his influence was from Cézanne, except he's starting to make forms. Cézanne talked about, you know, everything's a cube, a cylinder, or a sphere. Well, you can see he was taking that to heart. That's Picasso's first jump away from Cézanne's more realistic-looking things. This guy always appealed to me. This is Maurice de Vlaminck. He's a French painter. His famous quote is, Van Gogh is my father. Okay, so he was part of the Favre group, I don't know my mispronunciation, which is wild beasts in French. And he, so the way he approached and look at the way he brings you into the space and at the same time animates all of it. And it's hard to see with the light here, but a remarkable painter, especially during the first 10 years of his life. He was also a very good athlete, by the way. He was renowned for being one of the premier bicyclists in France at the time. And this guy, this is Georges Braque, and again, somebody I just, you know, he was the guy who, along with Picasso, are credited with taking and going to the end point of what they call analytical cubism, where they began to basically break everything up into little teeny pieces, almost like shattering the canvas. And this is his late work, though. This would have been probably 1950 or something like that. But always admired him. And again, he's, you know, plays the flat in this, you know, the depth, and the color, the light, the dark. There's this light dark thing, the way he creates that space using that as well. Really, you know, like this person's in shadow. I love to see that kind of thing where you can just feel, even though there's not a third dimension in all the rendering of the face and body, you can just feel the space because everything has the same type of what I call atmospheric color. It fits into an atmosphere. And this atmosphere here is a different atmosphere from here, because this one is lit and this one is in shadow, but still lit. But it has to be lit because, again, going back to 20th century ideas, if you don't allow people to recognize every single portion of the canvas spatially through the light that they hold, it doesn't make sense as a canvas, because you don't see the third dimension. That's why, while I'm at this, there's a painting at the Museum of Fine Art by John Singer Sargent. And my teachers at BU, which I'll get to, just hated the painting. It's one of the most beloved paintings in the world. It's three little girls with these big vases. And I'll tell you, Guston, everybody I knew at BU, would just lambaste that painting. And the reason is because in the middle of that painting is a big black area. And they said you could drive a truck through that. There's just no way you could touch it. It's just completely black. And Sargent uses black well sometimes. Like there's beautiful, you know, paintings of, there's a woman in black, for instance, wear the black dress. But it is a painting that is missing a center. And you don't see that in any of these paintings here. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. So I'm in New York City. I get there. As Emila mentioned, I didn't know where to go to study, except I'd read about Jackson Pollock and Philip Guston and Thomas Hart Benton teaching at this place. It was called the Art Students League in New York City. It's on 57th Street, still is there today. So, and it was an important thing for me because it was a walk-in art school. You just walked in the door, signed up for an artist. They have a book of, you know, shows you all these different painters that are teaching there. I picked out Bruce Dorfman, who's still alive today. He must be like 90, but he's still alive today. And so I went to his studio and started painting with him every day. And at the same time, I was living in the Y, and I was making, I remember all these, I was making $39 a week, and the Art Students League cost me $19 a week. And no, I'm sorry, my rent cost me $19 a week. Our Student League was probably even cheaper than that, but I ended up like having like $8 left every week, right? So when I first met my wife, who's here now, I was extremely thin because I was, the YMCA or the YMHA did not allow you to have any cooking utensils. So I used to go across the street to like, what's it called, Gustedes, is that what, and buy a can of, I used to buy chunky Campbell's soup and eat it cold. So you can see I really wanted to be an artist. So, so anyway, this is my first painting in New York. You can see, again, all the stuff I've been talking about. But let's go through these quickly, because otherwise I'm going to take up too much time. So next one, please. Another early painting in New York City. Next one. Okay. By the way, those first two were not very liked by my teachers because they thought I was just harking back to the past, and they were right. So it's Bruce Dorfman I'm talking about. But at the same time, Bruce Dorfman really liked me for some reason because I was really trying, I guess. So he saw that I was a starving young art student. So he said, hey, I got something I can do for you. There's a guy that wants an apprentice. And this guy was Seymour Leichman. And he said, go down and see him, and then you won't have to pay tuition. He'll help you out. And that's what happened. So I left the Art Students League, went down to this guy Seymour Leichman's studio. He liked me right away. And I worked with him for 4 years. Okay, I have no undergraduate education in art, so that was my introduction to semi-formal art training. Anyway, so I was an apprentice. I would stretch canvases. I would paint on canvases occasionally. I would do all the things apprentices have always done for artists. Anyway, so this is one of the first paintings I made with him. And I got very involved with Matisse, but I also got very involved with the idea that as a painting is being made, you can leave tracks of interest. So this whole journey idea, you can see that in the leaf here. I wanted to move it, but I thought, oh geez, when I move it, you can still see where it used to be. I'll leave that track. It makes sense to me, and that happens all over this painting. Okay, so that was a new idea for me. I remember these new ideas were really exciting to me at the time. So let's go to the next one. So this will be the 4 years I was at. I'm only going to show you a few paintings here. Still involved with Cubism. This is my wife. It's a long story, but I'll just tell you. So this is very Matisse-like. The reason I showed you that earlier Matisse of his wife. This is my wife now. She wasn't then. This is an interesting story. I've told you too many stories. I hope I'm not. Am I doing okay? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Because I have so many stories about this. Do you see the way she's holding her hand? I kept painting and day after day, and I couldn't get this right, And then she went out to the bathroom, and there was this huge door that was metal door, because in New York City it was in 1 Hudson Street, which is now famous, but back then it was a trashy area to be in. That's where a lot of artists had their studios. Anyway, so the door, which is one of the, an unbreakable door, closed on as she was leaving, and it went against her hand, and she goes back in like this and sits down like that, and I said, perfect, because it gave me something. It made me discover this pentagon here, okay, and the pentagon with the head coming off of it. So it just made perfect sense to me and where I was at the time. Okay, go on to the next one. And then, as our teachers do, they said, you're getting too far away from naturalism. You got to, remember, you got to keep learning how to use light as light really is. And you got to keep that in your work. So my teacher, Philip Guston, said, you got to, just copy something as you see it. So again, this isn't a very good reproduction, and it's not too dark, it's dark in here, or light in here rather, so you can't see it. But this is the corner of the loft that my wife and I were my friend at the time moved into, and this is just, it was one of these lofts on 19th Street, and where now, actually the building's now owned by NYU, but back then it was just in transition. But you can see there's the electrical lines, everything was on the surface, so it was really, this is a water heater down here, and it, you know, it really worked. So, and it re-educated me in natural light. The natural light here, I shouldn't say natural light, this is light from from fluorescent lights. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, then that was, I had applied to graduate school. I applied to 3 graduate schools. I only got into one. I got rejected by California because they said you have a master's degree already. I wanted to work with Richard Diebenkorn in Los Angeles at the time, but they told me you already have a master's degree. They were cutting back. If you had a master's degree, the University of California wouldn't let me in. I applied to Yale. I got called up there. They interviewed me, and they were thinking about bringing me in, and then I was told, I don't know, maybe some of you know this name, maybe Patrick knows, Al Held was there. And Al Held, I wanted to work with him because he was interested in the three-dimensional canvases to a certain degree. But I was told by the graduate student who was kind of being paid to usher the artists in and out, said, Al Held doesn't like you. And I said, why? He said, because you're a science person. He's afraid of having somebody in science here that does not have an undergraduate degree in art. So he said, I don't think you're going to get in. And I didn't get in. So, and then the third place I applied to was Boston University, and I wanted to work with Philip Guston. The reason I'm showing you this is I thought Philip Guston was painting this way. I really was just love, if you see a Philip Guston, they go see them at, like this, go see them at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston or anywhere. This is a style he did, it's called what we'll consider his middle style. And Guston, if you asked him about it, he says, oh, I only did that for 10 years. But this is what made him famous. He grew up with him and Jackson Pollock, their claim to fame and their camaraderie started, at least claim to fame in a small high school in California, is that they got kicked out because they made a cartoon a book that criticized the administration of the high school. So they both got kicked out together. The difference was Pollock actually felt bad about it and went to New York but went back and finished his high school education. Guston never finished his high school education. He just went to New York and never came back. So he becomes my principal mentor in my life, actually, in terms of art. But this is what I thought I was getting into. This is, you can't see these very well. This is a de Kooning, Willem de Kooning, another very important person to me at this point. This is Arshile Gorky, probably the most important one to me at this point. You'll see in just a minute. And this is Adolf Gottlieb, who, as you can see, flat space, but very animated with pictorial references. Okay, let's go to the next one. So I enter BU. These are my first paintings at BU. And let's just do one after another just so you can see them. Okay, here, you can see the Gorky influence on this one. The next one. This is a drawing, and this is the first drawing that Philip Guston liked. He wasn't quite sure about the other ones. And in fact, there's Philip Guston fingerprints in this drawing because he would go and says, I really like this, and I really kept touching it. Anyway, my brother now owns this, and every once in a while I'll go down there and I'll say, oh, there's the Philip Guston fingerprint. You know? Okay, anyway, before this, just a really quick note. When I first started there, I actually tried to make sort of the Cubist type style things in Cezanne, and Guston actually, the very first day I met him, it was really interesting. He comes in and he says, what are you doing? And I said, well, this is what I know how to do. He says, exactly. He said, you know, you're just repeating yourself. This is not what art is about. And he says, and before he said all that, by the way, he asked me, do you want me to hit you with my fist with a rock in it or with a pillow around in other words, do you want this hard or soft? And I said, just give it to me hard. And so he just told me, you know, if you don't change your ways, you're not going to become a painter. And so this is the first one he did like. Let's go to the next one. This is a very large painting, maybe 15 feet across. And then the next one, and you can see the Gorky. Now this is Philip Guston though. So Guston was okay with those. But this is what he had turned to. And this is 1970. So this is the year, this is 1977. So this is the year I entered BU. That's what he looked like. By the way, he died in 1980. He's only 65 here, okay? So he aged. Does he have a cigarette in his hand? Yes, he definitely does. He could not stop smoking. He had high blood pressure. He would take pills as I was walking with him through the hall and stuff like that. But anyway, so you can see this painting here, but in the next slide, I'll show you really what he was doing at the time. So if you go to that. This is Philip Guston's work in the 70s, 2 of them. And they're now world famous for, him breaking with the abstract expressionists, who he was part of with Jackson Pollock, although they called Guston an abstract impressionist because he was a little more subtle than Pollock and some of the others, and used kind of a shimmering surface. Anyway, so you can see in this work how he's begun a whole sort of personal mythology, feet, somebody, anyway, I won't go into any more than that. But he also both flattens space and creates space. So very 20th century, not being too radical that way. Let's go to the next one because we'll now get back to me. So he really convinced me to try figuration. This is my first painting going that way. And as you can see, it's got a lot of elements that he was dealing with. And if you go on to the next one, please. Okay, this is the first painting he liked in this direction. And you can see one of the things I was playing with is the same things I was there. The head is turned, but the shadow isn't turned. And he said he could really feel that I just enjoyed making a bunch of little objects. And that stuck with me all these days. So some of the things he said to me, I think one of the things that happens with a teacher is if he's really good, he doesn't tell you to do what he does, and Guston was kind of steering me towards figuration, but he was trying to identify in me what made me happy about being a painter. And it was making a lot of forms. And you can see this is much more three-dimensional than the Guston you just saw. Let's go to the next one. And then this is one of my last paintings there, and I don't know what I look back at this painting, it seems very strange to me today, but you can see I was trying to deal with human nature as well. And this was bought right out of the graduate school show, or the MFA show. It's a nice painting, but I don't think it's not going to stick with me. Let's go to the next one. Okay, and I also showed this at the MFA show as well. As you can see, even though Guston was pushing me towards figuration, I was trying to grapple with my three-dimensional forms and my abstract forms. So that ends my BU career. Let's now go to the next one. So after Boston University, Guston was still with me. I don't know if you recognize his head here from if you know much about painting. There's a guy called Max Beckmann, and he painted similar type heads for some reason, and Max Beckmann, Guston had like a pantheon of 5 painters. So I heard a lot about De Chirico, heard a lot about Max Beckmann. He didn't actually like Jackson Pollock's work. I heard, anyway, I can't remember the other ones. Oh yeah, Piero della Francesca, which is an Italian person from pre-Renaissance, actually early Renaissance. Anyway, there's actually one painting by Guston which is interesting. He says, "My pantheon." I think Tiepolo is a French, is in there. Anyway, but I could talk forever about all these things. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, it didn't, Guston's influence didn't last long because it lasted long in terms of approach. If anything I learned from him is approach and how to be involved with the act of painting, as I've been saying right from the beginning, like the Joseph Campbell quote. And so I went right back to three-dimensional stuff. But I don't know if you know de Kooning's work, but de Kooning at a certain period was trying to break through, and he did a whole series of black and white paintings because it makes you animate things without the problem of color. So that's what I did here. And let's go to the next one. So for about a few years I did this. And this was still in Boston, in Needham area. I lived in Needham, Massachusetts for a little while. Here's a drawing. I draw, by the way, like crazy. I draw 2 to 3 drawings a day. I'm just a crazy drawer, okay? So the paintings, to me, kind of coalesce my drawing. Let's go to the next one. And this is an important painting in that this is a diptych, but I began to put framing as part of it, those sticking out wood. So I was still trying to punch the 3 dimensions. So this is where I really start to come into who I am. I need that 3rd dimension. Let's go on to the next one. So this is the whole series of paintings I did when I first got here. You can see the colors come back in. This was actually shown at several galleries, or a couple of different places here. At Colby Sawyer, they had a show of mine right away. This was in it. It was also, there's a big review of this painting because it was shown at Woodstock in a gallery in Woodstock, which was an important gallery at the time. And it was reviewed by a man from the Valley News, a big full-page review about this, which you can see on my website if you want. Okay, and go on to the next one, please. So I'm just going to go through these quickly. You can see what I'm doing. If you really could see this painting, these are really crusty. They're heavy paintings because they got so much paint on them, okay? So one of the reasons people put a lot of paint on canvas is because I make a lot of mistakes, is one thing, of course, or they want mistakes. They're paths along the way. But the other reason is because in the 20th century, you want to make people aware of the surface. So one reason to make so much crustiness on the surface is because even if you're doing the 3rd dimension, you're saying, hey, this is paint, this is flat, this is it right in front of you. And it makes you do that double take. Let's go on to the next one. I must have made like 100 paintings like this, but anyway, I'm just showing you 4. One more, please. Okay, my wife always hated this. She said it looked like intestines, but the reason I'm showing it to you is because this roll, and it comes up a lot still in some of my work here, and I don't see some of the drawings have. But anyway, this idea of things wrapping around each other still is coming up, and I'm still very involved with that, and I'm not sure why exactly. Let's go to the next one. Then I actually went 3-dimensional. This is a 3-dimensional object, really. I use styrofoam, plaster, and paint to make this, and wood. And this is literally a hole. You could put your fist in there. And anyway, and then the next one, which is also very big and very heavy because this is all plaster. I actually call this bulge X. This bulge comes out about 1 foot. Okay, so it became sculptural. And but the construction was massive. It took me days to make something like this. So this ended my career, or but the portion of my career as doing this abstract stuff. So let's go to the next thing. And then I returned, and we have the owners of this painting right here. And I returned to Philip Guston and had to rehash it again. For some reason, I had to go back and I had to rehash figurative work. Do I have to finish in 10 minutes? No. Keep going. You can walk out if you want. I'm on a roll here, okay? Anyway, so now I'm going to show you a whole series of paintings I did figurative work. It was, 1994 to 2010. For 6 years, I revisited figuration. And I had to do it, I think, because I had to figure out, did Guston know something in this world that I didn't know? Because what he would say to me is things like, why do you want to do abstract work? It says so much more if you put some references to reality. Because then you not only deal with the paint and the color and the light and the surface, but you deal with something that people can attach themselves to. So I had to check that out. So let's go through the series of paintings here. Okay, here's another one. I was a little more crazy than Gust in some ways, in terms of, okay, I forget what this is called. Next one, please. This painting sold right out of the gallery too. It's a very nice painting. This one I do remember. I was thinking of the words from Gershwin's song "Summertime." Summertime, and the fish are jumping, and anyway. Anyway, somebody asked me, what's he doing with the microphone? That's supposed to be a chocolate chip ice cream cone, by the way. Okay, anyway, let's go to the next one. And this is an owner of this painting is right here, Bruce Pact. Shouldn't give that away because now you know. Anyway, this is, go back to the other one for a second. So anyway, this is one of the more complex paintings of this group, and I was revisiting a lot of different ideas. You know, you can even see some of the. Remember, I mentioned Adolf Gottlieb. Some of those are Adolf Gottlieb-like things in the upper left. I got the lines, and I've got space, and I've got I got the dots in the back, but I've also got some hot coals supposed to be. Duck, I think, waiting to be. Anyway, let's go on. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, this painting was actually a painting that got an award at a show down in Connecticut for being one of the best paintings in New England that year. It was picked out not by a New Englander, though. It was picked out by a curator from California. And I remember when I went down to pick it up, even though the curator really loved it, the guy that did the show, the young women there hated it. And they told me, just get it out of our sight, get it out of our sight. And so it's called Valentine's Day, by the way. And other people, here's a painting. Again, there's some Guston references in this. If you knew earlier Guston than the one I showed you, some of these plank-like forms and stuff happened in some of his first figurative phase. But a lot of light in here. This is called match light, and it's very bright painting if you see it in real life. At least the light is. Go to the next one, please. And this is, one back. This is a painting that was actually shown at my last show in Boston about 10 years ago now. And this was during, right after we went into Iraq, like 2004 or something like that. And it's actually called The Insurgent. And The Insurgent is that guy with the head sticking up over there. Okay, let's go on to the next one. And then this is near the end of my painting in a figurative way, so I'll just show you this, and then let's go on to the next one. That's a self-portrait, by the way. And then at that point, I retired from teaching, and this was the first painting I made after my retirement. So I'm still doing figurative work, but this painting took me a year, 6 months, I don't know, a long time. Because it was like, all of a sudden I had all the time I wanted in the studio. So I was now renewing myself and trying to figure out who the heck I was. So as you can see, all the things I've been talking about, the space, animated with a bunch of stones, little objects, fish, larger, smaller, all the things that I'm interested in, except it's still figuration. Okay, so let's go to the next one. And I drew, I have hundreds of, just many, many drawings. So I'm just showing you these just to show you what I was doing for about 5 years after I retired. I did figuration. Let's go to the next one. This was like almost the last painting I did in figuration. It's never completed. You can see there's a lot of left, but I have one more painting that's on, which is next. Next. And this is the last painting I did that has physical references or references to, I was going to say reality, but it's not really. This was January 2016. So these works I'm showing you today, their origin is at the beginning of 2016. So let's go to the next one. And who am I thinking about now? I'm showing you 3 important painters to me right now that I look at all the time. This is Anselm Kiefer. He's actually exactly my age. He's a German painter, born same year as I was, and he's probably regarded as one of the most important painters that is still painting today. Anyway, you can see the 3 dimensions in that. This, of course, is Francis Bacon. The reason I'm showing you this is if you can see the way he creates space, sometimes he'll create like a little box that has nothing to do with anything except for creating space. And then this is one of the most important painters to me, who I just realized, I just met John Stomberg the other day, who's at the Hood now. What's interesting about this is I've been following him since the 70s. This painting was actually made in 1977, I think. You can see the 3D. It's very crusty with paint, sort of like the way I showed you my earlier work. It punches in and out spatially, this sort of shadow from this form here. After Philip Dustin died in 1980, this is the guy they hired to take his place and do the graduate school. He's an English painter. I never met him. John Stomberg has written a monograph on him. You can get it on Amazon if you're interested. It's out of print, but you can still get it. But anyway, he's a very fascinating painter to me. So that's what I was thinking about, and then here's what happened. So let's go to the next one. Did I say John Walker, his name is? Yeah, like W-A-L-K-E-R. Okay, so now here we are coming to what I'm doing now. So this is 2016. This is a bunch of drawings from that year. Just I probably drew a lot more than I painted that year. Okay, so let's go on. But here, the reason I'm showing you this one is this is one of the very first paintings I did. Not a lot of color in this, very simple color theme. But here you see the Francis Bacon kind of way of creating a box that's a kind of a distorted box, but a place that gives you a spatial feeling along with the way the stars work. Okay, let's go to the next one. I started to develop very rapidly now, and I'm almost done with the slideshow because this painting is this painting. Okay, and so here I am harking back to light, color. I was thinking about Monet, the Impressionists, and the haystacks when I did this. You know, there's, at the same time it creates a 3D-ness about it with the shadowing. And then the next one, please. And here we are now. You are here. And that's this painting right here. Okay, so I've now brought you up to date. I'm going to stop talking except for the next slide. And I just wanted you to see these because one of the things I am very involved with is process. So if you're involved with process and thinking about how how does someone make decisions along the way, and I keep track of everything. Pablo Picasso once said that his work is his diary. That's the way he thought of his work. It's like, landmarks along the way. And I think of it that way, but I keep very good track of it. And on my blog, I write almost every single day. So for instance, if you went there right now, you would see the drawing I made yesterday. Okay, usually, first thing I do in the morning is I go to my blog and I write and post. If I don't do anything the day before, which has been happening relatively often recently because I've been putting shows together, there won't be a post. This one is a summary of everything. And this is a .org because I think of it as an educational tool. And actually, there's a school outside of London that wrote me and said they're using this in their graduate school to teach painters how to think. So, and this one is a collection of everything. And one of the things on this I just wanted to point out is that if you're interested in where this painting came from and what it went through, and maybe nobody's interested because you're not painters, well, we do have some painters here. There's slideshows with every single painting I've made over the last 10 years. So what you can do is you can go to that part of the Mehrbach.com, you push play, and I think this painting went through something like 21 different states. You'll see them play one after another. Okay, and that's really important to me because it just helps me understand process, and it gives me heart that I can solve things. Because when you start a painting, I said, Picasso said the most scariest thing in the world is a white canvas. When you start things, it's really, you don't have a clue. I don't have a clue. Maybe some people do. But I don't have a clue where it's going. And keeping track of it for some reason makes me know that the tracks do lead to success. Because I have to tell you, I am more than ever now sticking with every painting I make, and I don't have failures anymore. I am happy with all of my paintings, which is a new thing for me. It's really new. Like many other painters, there's a whole career out there that I've, things that I tossed away because they didn't, I could not get them. But if there's anything that's been good about being who I am now, and that I taught, I have a pension, and I can go to the studio, I don't have to worry about making money from other sources than what I already have coming in. I just started taking Social Security. I will get my first major Social Security check next month. So I'm, and anyway, is that I go to the studio every single day and I take the next step. I'm on a path I don't know where it's going, but that next step has allowed me, day after day after day, many, many steps behind me, to start making paintings that I can resolve. And, you know, I mentioned running and all that stuff before, and I had a thing about problem solving in the very first slide. I am such a believer in failure being on the way to success, that if you take roads that don't work out, well, you're a painter, you can rub it out, you can go another way. And I taught, one of the things, one of my proudest things that I taught at Hanover High School, because when I taught at Hanover High School, I was hired to teach art, but I was also hired to teach physics, and I had to invent courses now and then because they didn't always have enough courses for me, so I invented a course that was a problem-solving course. It's called CAPS, which was called Chemistry and Physics for Projects for Seniors. And I'm very proud of that because I was able to teach people the road to problem solving. In fact, Dartmouth today, because I worked with a guy over there, a guy named Bob Collier, on creating this course, they still use my design for a problem solving loop to teach their graduate students how to problem solve. It's called the problem solving loop, and it's just about how you spiral and spiral and spiral and spiral, not brainstorming, you know, you keep missing, come back, and it's just about how eventually, if you just keep with it, you will then hit the target. And that target, of course, is not something you ever envisioned was the target. You know, just like what I said about Joseph Campbell. And that, to me, is such an important part of my existence and living that I'm very proud of having created that course. It's still being taught by a different, Kevin Levine, I think, at Hanover High School now. And that's all I have to say. So, unless we can go around if you want and talk about individual paintings. If you're interested, you can question me if you want. But I'm done here. Okay.
So let's just maybe we'll quickly turn the lights on. If anyone needs to stand up for a quick transition.
I told my wife I'd never fill up a whole hour, but I did, didn't I? So.
I'm going to run.
Okay.
That's great.
Thank you. Yeah, let's get together.
Walker too.
Oh, you do?
Yeah.
Good.
Comment. I think it's really interesting the way you went through all these different areas to, like, Philip Guston's sort of stuff, and then you went to white before you started a new way of painting. I just think it's really interesting how you came at how to get to where you are.
Yeah. Yeah, what's interesting about that to me is when I met Philip Guston, he was a figurative artist. But as I told you, I walked up to him and I thought of him as an abstract artist. And when I would encounter him about that, he would just say, oh, I only did that for a little time. But he did it for 10 to 15 years. And if you look at his path through life, he started out in the WPA era. He made murals and things like that, and a lot of figurative work. You know, there's actually several post offices that still have his murals on the walls. And then he went in, when he went to New York and he had to make a living, and he was working with Jackson Pollock, and he knew Willem de Kooning. He was one of the group of people that used to meet in this little bar in the Village. What was the name of the bar? I can't remember the name of the bar right now. But I've been in it. It's nothing like it used to be. Actually, if you see the movie, if you really want to see a little picture of that era, really fascinating, you know, Franz Klein, people like that. Do you know the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel? Mm-hmm. If you watch, there's a episode in the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel just like this year, you know, and she's up for an Emmy, I think, and she's probably going to win the actress, I forget her name. But there's a whole episode that they're in, it's the Cedar Bar. They're in the Cedar Bar, and Franz Klein comes up to them, and there's a bunch of painters, and then she actually goes off and goes to a studio with one of the painters. Now, it's a painter that it's a fictional painter, but it's interesting that that era and that whole Cedar Tavern idea and how those group of painters just worked together was there. Now, the reason I'm telling you that is because Guston dove into that, but like me, and maybe this gave me the courage to do this, he got to a certain point and said, this is not who I am. And so he would tell you the same thing I'm telling you, just like I began really more with Arshile Gorky and really loving the abstractions of Pierre Mondrian and that the whole more abstract ideas, because you could really wrestle with other things that canvases are about. Surface, paint, form, 3 dimensions, things, I could go straight for it. He would tell you that he had to return, but when he returned, he used all the stuff he learned from the gushy, because his paintings are very gushy paint, and they still end up that way when he does a figurative work, if you see one of them. So it's interesting how you carry all of that along. So, because it's all part of you. It's just you have to weed out. You wish you could do it faster. I always worry about lifespan, so I need a lot of more years to work all this out. So.
In your artist statement, you had mentioned a quote about, like a master artist and the apprentice and sort of, or a teacher and a student artist and that dynamic.
Yeah.
And how, would you just maybe mention that in your experience, sort of wrestling with, studying under someone like Guston? Yeah, that is a real big problem, because it isn't for me anymore, but you can see how I think it's a man named Haim Patel. He's actually a contemporary of ours, and he's thought of as a comedian, and I guess he writes some too. But he talks about how you look at a mentor as a father, and the harder you try to be like the father, you eventually realize you can never be like the father. And at the moment you begin to realize you cannot be that person, you start to become yourself. And that really is what's happened to me. Because you can see I really tried to be a figurative painter. I really tried. But I just kept coming up against these walls and saying, man, this is interesting, but I don't have that much to say. I'm more interested in saying things about the way a painting works and all of so that's, and leaving Guston behind was really hard, because when you meet a person of his caliber, they come with such force of ideas. I mean, they for everything they do, they will tell you in detail how they came to that thought pattern. But of course, that's their thought pattern, and it's really, and when you're young, you're looking for models, and so it took me, as you can see, years. I would say the last 3 to 4 years is I'm now, the reason by the way, I've gone through, and I wrote about this today on my blog, I've gone through depression and exhilaration, and I mean everything that everyone goes through with my work. I, felt like giving it up at times, and especially over the last 10, it's been 2010 I retired from teaching. I went through all of that, and there were days I just said, I got to go out studio, but I really don't know what I'm doing. I really, I feel like I'm a monkey out there just slapping paint on canvas. And so that all just has gone away. I am now myself. I am now, when I walk to the studio every day, I'm excited every day. And because I don't go out there with any preconceived notions. Guston was a preconceived notion in my head. He forced himself on me, and that's gone, finally. But, how old am I? I'm not telling you. So it took, but it's taken, my whole lifetime up until 2-3 years ago to get to the place where I can now be myself. What? Not yet. Any other questions?
Could you say a little bit about the paintings that you more like? What are you?
Well, I actually like all these paintings for different reasons. Yeah. It's like children, you know where you were when you had them, and so I mentioned this one. This is me coming out of the figuration phase. This is very early on in 2016. And and I was thinking back to Monet, the light, if you ever seen if you get to the Museum of Fine Art, they have like 10 of the haystack paintings by Monet. Okay, so that's what I was thinking about here, because they're just brilliant paintings. I mean, you know, talking about Monet going, you know, near the end of his life, he's very abstract with the water lilies, some of them. But the haystacks were the first ones where you say, why the hell would anybody paint a haystack? I mean, it's just a lump, you know. But he just animates them with light and color and you know, vibrancy. And that's what I was thinking about this. But that's kind of an exit painting, because if I go to, you know, in terms of moving out of resembling reality, I then moved to, you know, more abstract, in that this doesn't, to me, this means nothing but what it is. You know, where that I see Monet in it. This, I just see a form sitting there, and I animated the canvas. You know, I created, maybe some of this harks back to P.A. Mondrian, his early work. You know, I didn't show you his, you know, his late work is all very square, but his early work had a lot of this going on. It's the way he played with space, and the way I you know, played with these different things coming up. And by the way, there's a drawing that goes with this right over there. So this dates it right here. Yeah, so this is 1/21/2017, and so that was made just as I played with this. And you can see what I was dealing with here too, is you can see it in the background. I wanted to create space, but I wanted to also deal with pattern. And I mentioned pattern because here's a pattern here, but Matisse, one of the great pattern players in ever, I've always been fascinated with pattern, because pattern can create a place in the canvas. And that, of course, I became much more smart about that, maybe taking it to a very high degree in this, because I create pattern up here, and I also create the space by you know, creating different sized dots. Like, you may not think this dot is smaller, bigger than this dot here, but it's 3 times larger, okay? And you don't see that, but if I put my finger on that and I go back here, do you see the difference in size? So there's this whole play of space that's just by pattern that Matisse never dealt with. He dealt with patterns up and down and across like that. But I'm dealing with patterns as an animator of in and out, you know. And so that happens here too. This is a very relatively recent painting. And by the way, one of the things that I've done recently is, when I started painting, I think, what kind of a mood am I in today? You know, what am I thinking about today? So I start thinking about things I've read and where they come from. So as you'll note, the more recent paintings all have a quote next to them, because they go along with the day one. Now, that doesn't mean that they end that way, but they kind of do still have a feeling. So for instance, this one is called Along for the Ride. And I was reading Philip Roth. By the way, there's a very beautiful picture on the web of Philip Roth sitting with Philip Guston. They were best friends, very good friends, okay? And they're sitting on a rock, and Guston's smoking a cigarette looking this way, and Philip Roth is on the other side, and you can see he's like talking to Guston, you know, hand waving and stuff like that. But here's the quote from American Pastoral, which a wonderful book, novel. Maybe the best thing would be to forget being right or wrong and just go along for the ride. And see, that's what I was thinking about, you know, what I talked about earlier. Just go along for the ride. Forget about being right or wrong. Let it speak for itself. Let it find itself. Let you be, you know, in conversation with your art. And so that's what you know, so that's what I was thinking about the day I began this. And as you can see, if you're interested, go to mehrbach.com and click on the slideshow of this. This went through, I don't know, 30 different renditions before it got there. It's completely different than how it began. I really was along for the ride. And it is a ride, because you're not enforcing yourself. You're not enforcing your final idea. And see, that's why figurative work in some way kind of scares me, because as soon as you get attached to something, although you start to see it as part of reality. And I want them to be their own reality, separate from everything else. Although when I say that, there's this very famous painting by Rembrandt, so way back, where it's a woman, and I forget the title of it, but she has a pearl earring on it, and they say that he had painted like this landscape and a whole bunch of stuff in the painting and stuff like that. And then he realized oh my God, the abstractness of that dangling pearl earring is so important to me that I'm going to wipe out half the painting so that you will concentrate on it. And it is. It's one of these paintings by Rembrandt, if you know his work, where there's a lot of blankness. Not the blankness of Sargent, by the way. You can touch Rembrandt's blank. He was smarter than Sargent. You can touch his absence of form and his absence of background. So anyway, I don't know what else to say. So, all the more recent ones, this one, this is an older painting. And this one here, they all have titles. I mean, they all have, they have titles, which they didn't used to, but they also have quotes. This one was done at the very end of last year. So it's about, I think I completed it actually in January of this year. And it's called Burnt Norton because I was reading T.S. Eliot at the time. So, and can I just read you this one thing and then I'll stop. I also, being a science fiction and science person, one of the most intriguing things to me is time travel, because the idea of what I've been talking about, doing over, getting the second chance. So in Burnt Norton, this is what he says. What might have been is an abstraction, remaining a perpetual possibility only in a world of speculation. What might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. Footfalls echo in the memory. So, and that's the way I thought of this painting. Even though I titled it like Day One, it is about how I entered the painting with a certain idea, but no matter what I did, the complexity of the idea and the idea of what the idea is, I did not know. And the memory was still there that I began with something, but as it says, it remains a perpetual possibility only in a world of speculation. So I speculated all the way through the painting. So, anyway.
Carl, one question. You sign your drawings, but you don't sign your paintings.
Yeah, I always intend to, but when I sit in front of a painting, these paintings, as I tell you, my drawings are, as I say, I make 2-3 drawings a day, so I really mark them to give myself that diary idea. Where was I? You know,
Yeah.
When I get to wanting to sign these, because I've worked in 20 states, 25 states on them. Every single edge, every single corner is accounted for. I say, where the hell can I put a signature? I can't, because I'd have to design the painting around the signature, And by the way, I'm not the first person. Paul Cézanne, if you look, there are some signed ones, but very few Cézannes are signed, paintings. But his drawings are always signed. And I didn't realize that until I started looking back, and I realized Cézanne thinks in a similar way I do, this sort of, the way I talked about this, what he called little sensations. I do worry about every little sensation. I remember making this painting and thinking, I need some kind of feel of light crossing here. So I dabbed, you can see the dashing the light to create a sort of a play of light across it. So every part is thought of and has to do with every other part. So if you put a signature in, it just looks like a blotch to me. Now Picasso didn't worry about that too much. There's Picasso's, he just would put a blotch, his signature in there, and it always annoyed me. So not that, but because he wasn't, it was so important for him to sign that he would disregard the problem. But George Braque, who I mentioned, if you look at a George Braque, he's like the only guy I know that I really appreciate. I'm sure there's other people out there. But he designs the signature into the painting. You will see a little circle over here, and it'll be next to another circle, and his name will be in there, and it'll be act as if it was designed into the painting. And I really appreciate that. But Van Gogh also, by the way, did not sign very often, very few times. And the same thing, I think he was so involved with making the paintings, you know, he didn't want to have to think of that. That's an extra thought altogether, and it's an annoying thought. So I try to sign the back with a black marker.
My thought was, gee, he's not finished. I'm still in process.
Yeah, that actually, I think that's such a hard question. It's a very smart question to ask, Ray, that, you know, when are you finished?
Yeah.
And every single painting I've ever made, there's a certain point where you just, really the way the final decision is made is, if I change something, is it gonna actually drastically move me towards a whole new idea, or is it just going to be enhancing what's already there? And I think at the point where I think enhancement would require a very large change, and I also have another canvas waiting for me. It's a pretty weak way to make a final decision, but at the same time, it's a necessary decision, because as I said, there are diaries. This is like a diary thing for me. At a certain point, you've exhausted the original idea that you, or I shouldn't say original, you exhausted the idea that this thing can be strongly move you on to a new idea that's come into your mind, and you already have a new idea, so that's kind of where you go with that. So. Anyway.
Well, if you want to see more of Carl's paintings, he has another show opening soon in Boston, Massachusetts, on June 7th at the Bromfield Gallery.
Oh yeah, by the way, I have cards here that I made. And what they have is they have the schedule for my summer. I've had 3 shows, including this one on here. And it's got one of the drawings that isn't here. It's going to be in Boston. But this painting, as you know, is right there. So anyway, all these up here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.